and Jackie Catt. Who wants to go first? You have 13 minutes between the two of you.
OK, fair enough. I'll go for 6.5 minutes then. Cahill, as you know, the history of this island is to a large extent dominated by our relationship with the neighbouring island. And history always concentrates on moments of strife and moments of turmoil. I think it's important, however, that we do state that there have been very many positive consequences as a result of the relationship between this island and the neighbouring larger island. If you look at the whole area of entertainment or the arts or sport or indeed business or trade unionism, there's a huge level of cooperation and connectivity between the two islands. That has been mutually beneficial for all the people that live on both islands. Now, it has to be said that our joint membership of the European Union since the early 1970s has assisted that cooperation and connectivity. We have become closer as a result of our joint membership of the European Union. So it's unquestionably the case, and I think we have to say this, that the relationship, the connectivity and the cooperation between the two islands and indeed between the two governments is going to be damaged as a result of Brexit. Nonetheless, the people of Britain voted for Brexit and their government has entered into a withdrawal agreement with the European Union, which we as a Parliament have ratified, and as members of the European Union we have agreed to it as well. I think it's important to point out, however, that everyone who promoted Brexit in the debate in Britain, both before and immediately after the vote, stated that there would be no difficulty in agreeing a trade deal with the European Union. And what has really happened is that the people who advanced Brexit didn't think about it and didn't think of the consequences before they put that important issue to the vote of the people of the United Kingdom. Let us go back and recall what actually happened and how we've got into this current crisis. Because we recall that the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Mrs May, entered into an agreement in November 2018 with the European Union. It was a withdrawal agreement. She brought it back to our Parliament. She was heavily criticised there. She tried on 4 occasions to get it through her Parliament between January and March, and she failed on each occasion. She did the only thing she could really do. She resigned in June of 2019, and subsequently the current Prime Minister took over in July of 2019. What did he do? He said that the withdrawal agreement that she had entered into with the European Union had to be changed. He couldn't tolerate it. We sort of sneered at him and said, "You're not going to be able to change it." But in fairness, he did manage to change it in a minor way. And as a result of a meeting that took place between himself and our then Taoiseach in the Wirral back in, I think it was in October 2019, that led the pathway to a change to the withdrawal agreement. But let's be clear as to what the change was, because we all recognised it at the time. He got rid of what he referred to as his dreaded backstop. But in effect what he did is he replaced the backstop which applied to all of the United Kingdom with a backstop that applied to Northern Ireland. And we all saw that for what it was. And the unionist politicians in Northern Ireland were outraged that it happened at the time. But let there be no ambiguity as to what the British government knew they were doing at that time back in October 2019. They knew the deal that they were entering into. And subsequently then the new Prime Minister tried to get his deal through the House of Commons and he failed again. And he went for a general election and he got a general election and he succeeded at that general election. And then in January of this year, he ratified that deal before the Houses of Commons. But before he ratified it, he launched an election manifesto on behalf of the Conservative Party, stating that this is a great deal. This is the only deal. This is a deal that will lead to the pathway to a trade deal with the European Union. That's how they sold it to the British public in the election in December 2019. And the British public went along with it, and they voted for the Tories, and they voted for their representation of that withdrawal agreement. As I say, he signed up to that withdrawal agreement in January 2019. And then, out of the blue, on the 8th of September this year, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland stands up in the House of Commons and says that they're introducing legislation that will breach the withdrawal agreement. It was extraordinary. And not only did he say he would breach it, he brazenly said in the House of Commons that this was a breach of international law. Now listen, there are very many decent people in the United Kingdom who are outraged by this. There are very many decent former Prime Ministers of the United Kingdom who are outraged by this. In fact, I think 5 Prime Ministers came out to assert their disgust that the good name of the United Kingdom was being traduced as a result of this brazen and reckless act by the British government. So that's the reason we are where we are. What message does that send out to us? I regret to say the message it sends out to this House, and indeed all of Europe, and indeed all of the world, is that this is not a trustworthy British government. And that's a very serious statement for any politician to make. But I regret to say it is true. And I think we need to recognise that in the ongoing negotiations between the British government and the European Union. We also need to ask ourselves, how now do we proceed with this breach of international law? I know the argument is made by some of the politicians in the United Kingdom that, well, this isn't a breach of international law yet because the Internal Markets Bill hasn't been enacted. That's not much of a point in their defence, because even the publication of that bill, in my assessment, is a breach of the provisions of Article 11 of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So there are measures within Article 12 of the Protocol which allow the European Union to vindicate the rights it has under the agreement that was entered into with the United Kingdom. I think we will need to do that. However, let us be clear about it. One thing we cannot do as a country, and one thing the European Union cannot do as a union, is to appease lawlessness on the part of a state, irrespective of how important that state is to the European Union or how distinguished it is in its, involvement with that European Union. So we cannot appease lawlessness because, as I said before, if you appease lawlessness, you're only going to encourage the lawbreaker. Listen, a lot of people have spoken about reunification in this House and the end of partition. I think that's a very valid point. But can I say this? Let us not make the same mistake about ending partition that the British made when it came to Brexit. We need to prepare for it. We need to get a team of academics together who can put forward a constitution for a new Ireland, and that is something that we need to ensure that we do, that we don't make the same mistakes as were made in Britain. Thank you.